How are you? Nice
I'm
to meet
doing fine. Great to be here.
On behalf of Fundación para el Progreso, I want to thank you for your presence, your time, and willingness. It is an honor to us to have you here.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
A small presentation of you. Well, Thomas Cushman is an American sociologist and professor of sociology in the Wellesley College, editor of the Journal of Human Rights, I think.
Former editor.
Former.
Yeah.
And also member of the editorial board of the Journal of Controversial Ideas, and also founder of Freedom Project.
That's correct. Yeah.
So, Tom, this is will be a reflexive conversation, a free conversation.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and from a topic, or about a topic that you have studied for a long time, is free speech. So my first question is about what's the state of free expression, or freedom of expression, or free speech in the west side of this world, and particularly in the US?
Well, I can't say much about the whole Western Hemisphere, but after speaking with some people here, I think some of the problems that we have in North America are going on down here as well. I actually had, well, most of my life I've studied free expression and the consequences of people who have engaged in freedom of expression and then been repressed somehow by the state. But it really is only 7 or 8 years ago that I started to get interested in freedom of expression as an issue, because I started to think there was a problem emerging in the United States that was, to me, philosophically, ethically problematic, but also politically and ideologically problematic, because what's unique about the United States is the First Amendment.
Yeah.
It's very unprecedented in almost all constitutions that the First Amendment guarantees freedom of expression. It's the foundational value of American civilization.
Founded by that amendment.
And we've had trouble with freedom of speech at various parts of our history in the 20th century, and it wasn't as big an issue before that. The First Amendment wasn't always enforced by the courts, and it was only in the 20th century that there was a more expansive view of the First Amendment. But my concern was that increasing numbers of younger students were coming into the college setting not really understanding either what the First Amendment was in terms of its in terms of law, in terms of values, or they didn't seem to think it was that important. They didn't. Not only did they not understand it very often, they thought it was actually not important, or that it was a problem. And that's when I started hearing students saying things like, "Well, freedom of speech allows hate speech and allows speech that harms." And I said, "Well, yes, it does, and that's a problem." The founders, when they framed the Constitution, when they said you have freedom of expression, weren't saying you should engage in hate speech. You should. No, they actually felt like you should govern yourself and speak rationally. And
they believe in person.
Right, but I mean, it was a right. Free speech and freedom of association was a right that you had to exercise responsibly. And if you're a virtuous person, you would be pleasant in your conversation, forceful, but be able to say what you wanted and not just anything you wanted. It was never about that. But I saw newer generations of students coming in thinking that freedom of expression was a problem, or rather than what made the United States completely unique in liberal democracies. And that's when I started engaging in trying to get students to understand why freedom of expression is central to everything we do in the intellectual world. It's central to intellectual life. It's central to science and scientific progress. And without it, there is no progress.
There is a different views. According to free speech, the American view is strongly defended as the free speech, but the European view is not so strong about expressing the free speech or defending it. So this has to about the kind of power. The free speech now in the 21st century change the view, and also change the power. Like, it's much easier to gain, harder to keep, and tends to be easy to lose.
Yes.
For example, the technology express the free expression in so much easy ways than before, and this has put a lot of power in the people's hands. So what's your vision about the kind of censorship that before past years has the government or the institutions, the authorities, but now the power to censor some expressions, some opinions, is in the people, not in the authorities, not in the government. Now
Yes, well,
the
that-
power change in the people, in not
Well,
the
that's what
government.
I'm most concerned about. That I think younger generations are tending more toward policing speech, and by policing speech, you actually are policing thought as well, and that's really disturbing to me because, and I'm not sure. The data are fairly clear, and I can talk about that a little bit, but the data show that there are distinct differences among young people about the value of freedom of speech on the one hand, or the value of, say, diversity, equity, and inclusion, multiculturalism on the other hand. An increasing number of young people, and I think a very slight majority in most of the surveys I looked at, are saying that diversity and inclusion and equity are more important than guaranteeing rights of freedom of speech. Now, all of those are good values. You know, diversity, equity, inclusion, freedom of speech are all good values. I mean, in my opinion, they're foundational values for liberal democracy. But the problem is when one group who adheres to one value system says, well, we can exercise our values, but you can't, and rights, but you can't exercise yours. And I think that's where the battle lines or the cultural lines are drawn now in American culture, that you have some people who are saying, well, it's more important to make people feel included and to be diverse and to promote equity than it is to allow people to say whatever they want. Because sometimes when they say whatever they want, they say things that are really not inclusive, don't lead to equity.
Things.
Yeah. So, you know, I don't mean to make it so binary, but it shapes up that way sometimes. That if you look at the average American university, they have all kinds of bureaucratic offices for diversity, equity, inclusion, multiculturalism, all which are valuable, but there are no deans of freedom of speech, you know, and there are no, in general, there are some centers of freedom of speech, but the administrative structure favors other sets of values, it seems to me. That administrators will say they're for freedom of speech, but they don't necessarily have offices at universities devoted to freedom of speech. And generally, universities these days have to be policed by outside organizations like the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. They have to look at universities and say, look, you can't do that because it's against the First Amendment. There shouldn't have to be watchdog organizations that, I'm glad they are. I'm a great fan of that
It's
organization.
worrying that exists.
But there shouldn't have to be outside organizations that are kind of monitoring rights violations in universities. You kind of think of Amnesty International in that sense, not the United States.
Talking about the same topic, universities, there is a special type of censorship in the universities. In the US, we have safe spaces, classes that can realize because the students, I don't know, they see like offensive classes from some teachers that cannot be expressed the idea because they are accused of hate speech.
Yes.
So what's your opinion, what's your point of view about the censorship in universities?
Well, it's a real problem. You know, there are people who would just say, they'll declare, well, no, there's no free speech problem in the universities, you know, because, look, they had this person. I think it's variable. There's some places that are more favorable toward it than others, but in general, I do think it's more of I would say, this is kind of, it's my argument anyway, it's more of I would call it a regime of self-censorship.
Okay.
I mean, it's not like in some cases, administrators are saying you can't say this and you can't do this, but usually they back off when people put pressure on them. You know, so if they say, well, we're going to have a speech code, then they're a public university, and then Foundation for Individual Rights will come in and say, look, it's against the First Amendment. If you want federal funding, you can't do that anymore, and then they pull back. But it's like a contest. But I think the self-censorship problem is the worst problem, is where people fear, and this is a general problem in American culture now, North American culture, sorry. The imposition of a regime in your own mind of self-censorship, where you're afraid to say anything that's even slightly provocative for fear that people will claim that you're harming them or you're actually being violent in your speech. If one small constituency feels like your speech is harmful, they can mobilize, protest, and make an issue out of it when you're just trying to move an argument forward. And so self-censorship is the worst kind of censorship because it's a self-silencing. It doesn't need any external power mechanism. It comes from within. But that's a very big problem, not just in the universities, and I can testify to the fact that it's a problem in universities. My students will tell me all the time that I teach sociology, so we talk about race, gender, all kinds of issues. They're always controversial. But whenever I might ask a question, no matter how I put it, I've taught for 32 years, no matter how I put it, students will be quiet. And I'll say, well, don't you have anything to say about racism or ethnic violence or anything like that? And they'll say, well, we're kind of afraid to talk. But later on, they'll say, we're kind of afraid to say anything just for fear that people will think that that we've said something harmful. So
there is according to what we are talking about, like political correctness is a relation. And I will ask you about a case in United States from an American actor, Jussi Smollett.
Yes.
That allegedly staged an attack by paying a lot of money to a group of people, like $3,000, I think, to make American Great Again caps and hurt him. What's the relation, if any relation, between this political correctness phenomenon with all we are talking about?
Well, that's a complicated case. I mean, I'm not an expert on race relations in the United States, and I comment on these things just generally as a sociologist. So what we have here is a case where a man who is a celebrity appears to have staged an attack on himself, that's what he's accused of doing, to benefit his own, to draw more attention to himself and benefit his own career. It's what I was talking about I know we're in an interview now, but earlier I was talking with some people about this idea of emotional capitalism, that people manipulate.
Let's talk about that concept.
People manipulate and use. They turn emotion, which is a feeling, into a tactical type of capital to secure more advantage for themselves, or to get more money, or to raise themselves up in social status. It's a well-developed sociological idea that emotions. It's not just material capital that can make it advance you, but you can actually use emotions as capital to advance you. And so I think that seems to be what the case is, and what seems to be troublesome about it to me is that it's using the most volatile emotions in American society right now to play with those and to use those in such a public way. It fires up cultural divisions more than if nothing happened at all. And I think that the use of those particular racial and political and ideological emotions to self-promote, it does real harm to people who are real victims of hate crimes and racist crimes. And people will try. In some cases, people will try anything to foster their own future. But using those particular emotions, there's no crime in doing that. There's a crime in staging the event, but it seems to me to be profoundly unethical and immoral to use those particular emotions in the United States context in a public way like that. It hurts the people that presumably this man is trying to protect. African Americans, members of the LGBTQ community, because when they actually experience violence, there's now going to be a suspicion that all these attacks are not real, and that doesn't do any justice to the victims. So he's being charged with a serious crime, but it's much more of a moral crime almost, if you want to call it that, in my opinion.
It's a vicious game, actually, playing with emotions. According to the victims, there are not victims in this case. And according to that, there is like the concept of fake news, actually, and with the relation of playing with emotions. So I will ask you about, there is any ethical debate on fake news that we haven't brought to the table actually in the society, or what is the consequences or the meaning of fake news in a liberal order and a modern society?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm always sensitive about using fake news as a concept as Donald Trump uses it, and the way he uses it is not the way I would use it. But it's fashionable to say, well, I don't want to do anything that's associated with Trump. But I mean, it's just because Trump said it, there's a saying in English, a stopped clock is right twice a day. And sometimes Trump says things that are right, and I would never deploy it in the way he does. He attacks the media, and I see it more sociologically as a phenomenon, which is more. It's not so much that it's fake news; it's that it's news as constructed by journalists or written by journalists to fit a pre-existing bias in the community that reads their newspaper or watches their television show. So CNN, the Boston Globe, New York Times, there's no secret that they have liberal bias, in the liberal sense, in the North American sense. They have liberal bias, there's no secret about that. But we always accepted that and just said, well, if you want a different point of view, read this newspaper, and then you'll decide for yourself. But now the news has become much more, the English word is tendentious, that the journalists are writing articles with their audience and market in mind, and they want to give a narrative, they want to give a story, a myth, or tell a story or whatever that fits the pre-existing biases and ideological dispositions of their audiences. And they're doing that because especially the newspapers are in trouble. And so, the Boston Globe has always been, say for instance, where I live, has always been a liberal newspaper, no question about it. It's Massachusetts, we call it deep blue state, I accept that. At least in the eastern part. But I think when they're writing stories now, there's a declining market for the Boston Globe. So I think they feel some pressure to create stories that fit what people want to hear. And that's a problem because what it shows is that the audiences for newspapers aren't seeking to get a balanced, objective view, this side and this side. They're looking for sources, news sources, which tell them what they want to hear, that confirm their own biases. And that doesn't seem progressive to me. I have a colleague who once said, I only read things that I agree with. And I said, well, what a boring life that is. You already know what you believe. Why do you have to read? That's like reading, if you're a fundamentalist Christian, you have to read the Bible over and over again. That's all you read. And every time you read it, you confirm your fundamentalist Christianity. But that's not exactly, there's no room for change there. The only way to change is by reading
the theory that defends John Mill, actually.
Yeah, and I do think the press, rather than call it fake news like Trump does, I think it's just that the press is now unabashedly, kind of unmitigatingly pushing particular kinds of agendas and particular kinds of stories just so they can stay in business. And it's really sad to watch, actually. It's sad to watch because what they do in a case like the Smollett case is that that's reported as a crime, and they just accept that it happened. Rather than investigating it, they say, well, look, it's terrible. And some editorial writer...
Look at this news.
Yeah, and they just believe it at face value. But and there are audiences that want to believe that it happened, and they're sad that it actually didn't happen. Because they want it to have happened because they hate Donald Trump so much that they actually want it to happen. They're sad that it didn't happen that way.
And this polarizes the society.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And that's why one person with a story like that, with an event like that, can just keep dividing the country. And I don't understand why it is that very intelligent journalists, and in my case, very intelligent professors, they seem to accept news like that uncritically. That if somebody from a supposed victim class or is victimized tells a story about how they were victimized, they just accept it at face value rather than saying, well, tell me more about it. You want to believe them. If they say, look, I was beat up because I'm black and gay, you want to believe that their story. You say, well, I'm sorry. But accepting it as the truth right off without any critical examination whatsoever on the part of the population that's supposed to be the most intelligent and the most critical.
Yeah.
That strikes me as a real crisis in American society right now. It's all a betrayal by the intellectuals in some ways.
Yeah, this crisis that divide, obviously, the US in this case, has to be, there is a relation between the fake news, the polarized society, with the identity politics. There is a connection, a relationship that you see in this. What is the connection between identity politics with the, I don't know, the hate
Yes,
speech,
that's
free
a very
speech,
good question.
and the divided
It's a very good
society?
question. I have to think about this for 1 second. I think the thing about identity politics is I'm actually not a complete critic of identity politics. And Mark Lilla, a friend of mine and colleague, came to Wellesley, and we had a conversation on stage, and he was criticizing identity politics, and I was giving him a little bit of a pushback. I said, well, wait a minute, I have Irish immigrant ancestors, and my grandmother was an Italian immigrant back in the early 20th century. And when those Irish relatives of mine mobilized for their interests, they mobilized as Irish. When my Italian relatives organized to promote their interests, they organized as Italians. So it was identity politics. I mean, the mafia was one of the great first identity politics organizations. That's right. They were Italians. They were very clear. They were Italians, and this is what we want. So I said, now you're coming, and I was giving him a hard time. I said, you're coming and you're saying that identity politics is dead. Now that, I say, African Americans and Asian Americans have discovered identity politics. And a lot of groups, you're saying it's no longer viable. I said, it is viable, but it has to be done in a way that's
responsible, actually.
That's responsible. And, of course, it's difficult for, a person like me, a white male, privileged person, to tell people in different identity groups how they should do their politics. I mean, I'm very sensitive about that. But one thing I do know as a sociologist, and as I try to look at this objectively, is that identity politics is almost always based on a fundamental story of victimization. That this is our group and we've been victimized in this way or marginalized in this way. And normally there's a case to be made. For instance, Asian Americans can point to the history of treatment of Asian Americans in the United States and say, look how they treated us. It was terrible, and it was. You have to acknowledge that historically. So there is some sense in which marginalized groups, identity politics groups there's truth to the stories, but what happens is that the victimization element of it takes precedence over other elements of it.
Well, Jordan Haidt said about a common enemy.
Yes, and it becomes enemy politics. I mean, I'm a victim of this, and you did this to me, and it becomes divisive. But the real problem is when the victimization, and this gets back to the idea of emotional capitalism, when the victimization is used tactically, emotionally, to advance a group's interests rather than to really seek social justice or justice of some kind. So what's happened to the media, it seems, to get back to your question, is that the media is willing to take the default position of believing a victim story before investigating more thoroughly. And I think that's the central mechanism I see that's problematic right now. That, this happened to me, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to write an editorial about it right away. And not be skeptical, not do normal journalistic things and say, well, okay, tell me the facts, and I'll look at the story, and I'll talk to the police, and I'll take my time. There's a hurry to get the news out, and that's another thing, get a speed to get the news out. But the use of the tactical use of victim narratives, victimhood, we would say in English, is problematic to me. Because it makes everybody into a vulnerable person, a vulnerable population, and then you just have a society that's compartmentalized with different victims. It's like a beehive of victims, just different compartments.
It's worrying, actually. A final question, Tom. You founded the Freedom Project.
Yes.
Tell us a few minutes what is about it.
Well, I did. It was 7 years ago or so. Students were coming to me and saying, well, we're not getting enough diversity of opinion, and some of them were conservative students, and Wellesley is a very liberal place, and they felt very marginalized, for instance, the college, they have a group of the college Republicans. There are 22,200 students at Wellesley, and their college Republicans has 6 student members. So, that tells you what you're doing with. Now, I'm not saying that the Republicans are under assault or under attack, although sometimes the students feel that way. But they came and they said, we'd love to have more openness and more speech. And so I started out very small and just invited different kinds of people.
Different point of views, actually.
Yeah, just for their points of view, that their ideas were different. Because what I try to teach students is that different ideas are the source of all creativity. That if you have just sameness and orthodoxy, you can't progress intellectually. And society can't progress if it doesn't progress intellectually. So I started very small, and then, interestingly enough, a number of Wellesley graduates, whether they were liberal or conservative, felt Wellesley needs more of this. We need more free speech. We need more freedom of expression. And the program started to grow considerably. And we built out a full-scale program at the center at the college, and it was hard work. It was going up. I don't want to tell a victim story. I just gave it. But it was
just talking about victims.
Let's just say that the task was Sisyphean. In the Camus' sense of the myth of Sisyphus. You roll the boulder up the hill, and then it falls down. You roll it up again. So it was a tough task, but it was actually rewarding because my view is that nothing that's worth doing shouldn't be difficult. And I think, after 6 years, after forging out the program with my vision, I felt it was time to step aside and let someone else take over, and I moved off to some other things. But, I'm quite confident that we've established it as an institutional presence at Wellesley that some students and faculty don't like, that's their right, and some students and faculty like, and that's their right. And I think the more pluralism we have and the more we can respect each other in our universities, the better off we are. There seems to be a kind of, this is another story probably, almost a crisis of bad faith in the universities. That, whether it's the right or the left, it doesn't matter. That whoever your opponent is, you look at that opponent and you used to think, what is the worst motive for what they're doing? And you assume that's the true one. So the Freedom Project must be, because some students feel harmed, it must be that the director of the Freedom Project, whoever that is deliberately trying to inflict harm on the student body by inviting these people, which is, it's the worst motive. I mean, what professor would do that? I guess there are some that would do it, but it wouldn't ever be me. You invite people who are different because you understand Wellesley's a women's college, and my view is that, if I could say so, as a white male, that I think that women, and I have daughters of my own that were college age not too long ago, that they do better if they're intellectually strong and they're able to deal with arguments that they dislike, and that do make them feel uncomfortable. I'm not talking about arguments that are deliberately harmful, like some racist coming in and saying these things, but somebody coming in who says, this is a different way of thinking about this. Have you ever thought of this? And then they can open their minds up and be more productive persons and flourish better. So my point is that freedom of expression is the most fundamental right for achieving human flourishing and what the Greeks call eudaimonia, the good life.
We hope to hear and see more of a Freedom Project. Actually,
yeah, it's still going. I've removed I'm not the director now, but it's still, the new director is wonderful. She was helpful in founding it, and so it seems to be I'm away this year, but at a distance it seems to be going fine, and I'm really happy about it.
So Tom, I want to thank you deeply for your time,
thank you.
For your reflexive considerations. We hope to come to you in the future.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, it's a wonderful
Chile.
institute you have here. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much for the
Thank
interview.
you. I appreciate it. Thanks.